Like many African leaders of his time, Obote had not fully considered what the post-independence period would look like. At first, this did not pose a major problem. Unlike several former colonies, Uganda entered independence with a relatively stable economy. Food supplies were sufficient, and British colonial policies had promoted the production of export crops, generating foreign exchange and funding various development initiatives. These advantages not only persisted but even grew in the early years after independence. The existing commercial structure also remained largely unchanged, with trade dominated by Indian merchants and a small number of Europeans. As Prime Minister, Obote was satisfied to maintain this arrangement, focusing instead on more urgent political challenges. The challenges Obote faced were largely rooted in Uganda's historical background, rather than his own actions. Although the country had gained independence and Obote came to power through an agreement with the centrally located Kingdom of Buganda, it soon became evident that combining a traditional monarchic system with a modern democratic framework was problematic. Tensions were unavoidable, regardless of the intentions on either side. These tensions eventually escalated into open conflict, and as seen in many African states, the faction that controlled the military prevailed. At that time, the army largely supported Obote. After the monarchy was abolished, the kingdom itself was dismantled, deepening resentment among its people and turning hostility into outright opposition. The unrest in Buganda disrupted the expected constitutional processes. Elections for both the legislature and the presidency were repeatedly delayed, fueling further accusations that Obote was governing in an increasingly authoritarian manner. Obote's overthrow was not driven by broad public dissatisfaction, but largely by the anxieties of a single individual. He had long placed his trust in a senior military officer, Idi Amin, whose loyalty, by his own standards, seemed unquestionable. However, Amin became entangled, alongside the Minister of Defense, Felix Onama, in an Israeli-backed scheme to stir unrest in southern Sudan. Funds from the defense budget were secretly diverted to support the operation, and when Obote uncovered this and demanded clarification, Amin reacted out of fear. In response, he launched a military coup, aided by Onama and sections of the army. Following the coup, Obote lived in exile in Tanzania under the protection of President Julius Nyerere. He returned to power as Uganda's president on December 17, 1980, after the Tanzania-Uganda War and the removal of Idi Amin. However, his second period in office was characterized by widespread insecurity, economic decline, and the Ugandan Bush War, which eventually led to his final overthrow in 1985 by his own army commanders. To fully understand Obote's regime, and the manner in which he established and maintained authoritarian rule in Uganda, it is essential to first examine his early life, as well as the political ambitions and aspirations he developed for his country. Milton Obote was born in 1925 in Mengo, located in northern Uganda, into the family of a chief who served during the colonial era. He received his early education across several regions, Mengo, Ekoli, and Busoga, before gaining admission to Makerere University. During his time at the university, Obote demonstrated strong academic potential and was awarded scholarships to study abroad, law in the United States and economics in the United Kingdom. However, his plans were abruptly halted when the British Provincial Commissioner of Uganda's northern province denied him permission to take up either opportunity, arguing that overseas education would not equip him to serve the country effectively. Frustrated by this decision, Obote abandoned his studies and relocated to Kenya, where he worked as a clerk on a sugar plantation. While there, he became increasingly involved in political activities, particularly through the trade union movement and his association with the Kenyan African Union. During this period, he is believed to have provided logistical support to Mau Mau fighters, an involvement that ultimately led to his arrest and detention by colonial authorities. Following his release in 1957, Obote returned to Uganda and joined the Uganda National Congress. His political career quickly gained momentum, and in 1958 he was elected to the Pre-Independence Legislative Council. In 1960, Obote established the Uganda People's Congress, by consolidating the remaining elements of the Uganda National Congress, along with a breakaway faction known as the Uganda People's Union. During this period, he grew increasingly determined to secure Uganda's independence, under a strongly centralized unitary system of governance, one that would significantly limit the autonomy traditionally enjoyed by the Baganda. The British authorities, despite the strong affinity many colonial officials held for the Baganda aristocracy, were nonetheless determined to prevent the territories they had carved out across East Africa from fragmenting along ethnic lines. Their broader objective was to maintain political cohesion within these colonial boundaries as independence approached. In Uganda, however, the Baganda wielded significant influence over the national political landscape. In 1959, their leadership made a pivotal miscalculation by withdrawing from the committee tasked with planning the country's transition to independence. This decision stemmed from British refusal to guarantee Buganda political autonomy or to recognize the Kabaka's supreme authority within his kingdom. The following year, in 1960, Buganda's leaders attempted to declare the kingdom an independent state, but the effort proved unsustainable. In 1961, they further distanced themselves from the national process by boycotting elections intended to establish internal self-government as a step toward full independence. Their absence created an opportunity for the rise of the Democratic Party, which was led by Benedicto Kiwanuka, a Catholic leader who stood outside the traditional Protestant Ganda aristocracy. As a result, the Democratic Party formed Uganda's first African-led government in 1961, although its powers were largely symbolic and constrained. Recognizing the consequences of their earlier withdrawal, the Protestant elite regrouped and established a monarchist party, known as Kabaka Yeka, meaning the Kabaka alone. Seeking to counter the growing influence of the Democratic Party, Kabaka Yeka entered into a strategic alliance with Obote's left-leaning Uganda People's Congress. This alliance proved decisive in the 1962 elections, which were intended to usher Uganda into full independence. Under the terms of their agreement, Buganda and 4 other southern kingdoms were granted federal status, while the UPC assumed control of the central government. The Kabaka Mutesa II took on the largely ceremonial role of president, while real executive authority rested with Obote as prime minister. From the outset, tensions were evident within the new political arrangement. Many northerners expressed dissatisfaction with the Kabaka's role as head of state, while the Buganda government, along with a significant portion of the Baganda population, harbored resentment over Obote's position as Prime Minister of Uganda. One of the most urgent issues facing newly independent Uganda was the conflict over the Lost Counties, territories that had originally belonged to Bunyoro but were later incorporated into Buganda. This situation dated back to the 1890s, when the British, with the support of the Kabaka of Buganda, defeated Bunyoro and subsequently rewarded Buganda with a portion of Bunyoro's land. This arrangement left a lasting sense of grievance among the Banyoro people. As independence approached, the British deliberately left the matter unresolved, effectively transferring the responsibility to Uganda's new leadership. According to the Independence Constitution, a referendum was to be conducted within 2 years, allowing the inhabitants of the Lost Counties to decide whether they wished to remain part of Buganda or return to Bunyoro. The Kabaka was reluctant to proceed with such a vote, fully aware that the Banyoro population would most likely choose to rejoin Bunyoro. Obote, however, insisted on moving forward with the referendum, which was eventually held in 1964. As anticipated, the results favored Bunyoro, leading to the loss of the counties for Buganda. This outcome significantly strained the already fragile alliance between Obote and the Kabaka, causing it to deteriorate rapidly. The relationship between Buganda and the Ugandan government had become so damaged that there was no turning back. What had once been quiet resentment and tension slowly turned into open hatred and conflict. By 1965, the political party Kabaka Yeka, which had been created to defend the interests of the Kabaka and Buganda, had completely fallen apart. During the ongoing power struggle between Buganda and the central government, Obote's government showed that it was determined to confront the issue directly and settle the disagreements once and for all. Unlike the earlier British protectorate government, which often avoided direct confrontation with Buganda, the new independent Ugandan government under Obote took a much tougher stance. Obote also benefited politically from the referendum over the Lost Counties. His decision to support the return of the territories to Bunyoro made him extremely popular among the Banyoro people. Many politicians who had previously opposed him now chose to join his Uganda People's Congress Party, and Obote rewarded several of them with important government positions. At the same time, Buganda's political influence began to weaken. No longer as powerful and united as before, it slowly started losing control and influence in national politics. Obote took advantage of this situation by introducing a series of constitutional changes that reduced the powers of the Kabaka as president, weakening his authority even further. In early February 1966, while Obote was away on an extended tour in northern Uganda, political events in Kampala moved very quickly behind the scenes. Several ministers secretly worked together to change parliament's schedule, so that Daudi Aching, the Secretary-General of the Kabaka Yeka party, and a close friend of the Kabaka, could present a serious motion against Obote's government. Aching accused Prime Minister Obote, two cabinet ministers, Nikian and Anama, and Colonel Idi Amin, who was then the deputy commander of the Ugandan army, of being involved in corruption. He claimed they had illegally profited from large-scale gold smuggling, and were also planning to overthrow Uganda's constitution. The motion called for Idi Amin to be suspended from his military position while the police investigated his bank account. Aching further alleged that the four men had shared a huge amount of money, about £125,000, among themselves. At this point, Colonel Idi Amin was still a loyal supporter of the government, which meant he firmly stood behind Obote. However, by 1966, many important figures within the government had already begun opposing the prime minister. After Daudi Aching presented his accusations in parliament, Kampala was thrown into a week of political tension, confusion, and secret plotting. Rumors spread rapidly across the country about suspicious military movements and the possibility of a coup. Government ministers and senior civil servants disappeared from their offices for days, creating an atmosphere of fear and uncertainty. The political divide had now become clear. On one side was the southern, mainly Bantu faction, which was allied with Brigadier Obote and quietly supported by the Kabaka. On the other side was the northern faction, led by Obote and backed by Colonel Idi Amin. Obote quickly returned to Kampala and on February 16, he publicly denied all the corruption allegations made by Aching. To show confidence in his innocence, he announced that an independent judicial commission of inquiry would be established to investigate the accusations fully. At that moment, however, it appeared as though the anti-Obote group was gaining political strength. Following his announcement, Obote and his supporters began making careful and strategic moves as the power struggle within the government intensified. On February 24, 1966, Obote made a radio announcement declaring that he had taken full control of the government. He also announced that he was suspending parts of the 1962 Constitution, especially the sections that defined the powers and authority of the president. Obote accused the Kabaka of violating the Constitution in several ways. He claimed that the Kabaka had refused to sign the bill related to the Lost Counties referendum, and had also refused to officially open parliament after the referendum had taken place. He further accused him of secretly ordering military troop movements, without informing either the Prime Minister or the Minister of Defense. Most seriously, Obote alleged that the Kabaka had privately contacted foreign embassies to ask for military assistance from other countries without government approval. A few days later, on March 2, Obote officially declared that all executive powers were now under his control. In response, the president warned that Obote was trying to establish a dictatorship by ignoring and violating Uganda's constitution, and claimed that such actions did not have the support of the Ugandan people. With important parts of the constitution now suspended, Obote and his supporters had to decide whether to simply change the existing constitution or completely replace it with a new one. Changing the 1962 constitution would have been a slow and difficult process, because it required approval from a two-thirds majority in parliament, as well as support from Uganda's Lukiko and other kingdom and district assemblies. To avoid these obstacles, Obote and his allies decided to introduce an entirely new constitution through the National Assembly. At the same time, the Kabaka had taken legal action against the government, claiming that he had been removed from power unfairly. Meanwhile, the Commission of Inquiry that had been set up to investigate corruption among top government officials was continuing its investigations and collecting evidence. However, the commission struggled to find solid proof for many of the accusations. Most of the witnesses denied having direct knowledge of gold smuggling from the Congo, or of Colonel Idi Amin's alleged involvement in secretly training troops in the forests around Mount Elgon. The only clear evidence the commission managed to confirm was that Amin had about £17,000 in his bank account. By this stage, Obote was very close to gaining complete political control over Uganda. On April 15, 1966, the National Assembly officially cancelled the 1962 Constitution and replaced it with a new one. Many members of Parliament reportedly found copies of the new Constitution, waiting on their desks that same morning. On the same day the new Constitution was passed, Obote was sworn in as the executive president of Uganda, giving him far greater powers than before. The 1966 Constitution greatly weakened the powers of Buganda and its traditional leadership. The Buganda government, as well as the governments of other kingdoms and districts, lost much of their authority. For example, the Public Service Commission of Buganda was abolished, meaning the kingdom could no longer control important government appointments such as chiefs. Buganda's own independent courts were also removed. To many Baganda people, these changes were seen as a direct attack on their culture, traditions, and long-respected institutions. They believed Obote was trying to take power away from Buganda and strengthen the central government at the kingdom's expense. What Obote viewed as correcting the imbalance of power between the national government and the kingdoms, many Baganda saw as a serious insult to the dignity and importance of their traditional system. As a result, political tension in Mengo, the seat of the Buganda government, and within the Lukiko, which was Buganda's parliament, continued to rise throughout May 1966. On May 20th, 3 county chiefs, including Lamika Sebanakita of Kyagwe and James Lataya of Singo, both close allies of the Kabaka, introduced a very bold proposal in the Buganda's parliament. The motion was passed unanimously. The Buganda parliament issued an ultimatum, demanding that the central government leave Buganda territory before May 30, 1966. On May 23, 1966, the central government police arrested the 3 county chiefs who had supported the Lukiko's ultimatum against the government. When news of their arrest spread across Buganda, especially in the counties of Kyagwe, Singo, Budu, and Bugarere, many angry people gathered to show support for the imprisoned chiefs. In several areas, local leaders managed to calm the crowds and convince them to go home, by claiming that the Kabaka wanted peace and did not want violence. However, in other places, some chiefs reacted differently. Instead of supporting the arrested leaders, they criticized them for not going far enough in encouraging a rebellion against the central government. Many people believed that an uprising was necessary to protect the Buganda kingdom and ensure the safety of the Kabaka. The central government viewed the Lukiko's ultimatum as an act of rebellion and was determined to crush any resistance by force if necessary. At the time, the Ugandan army was largely dominated by northerners, most of whom supported Obote and the central government. On the same day that the Buganda county chiefs were arrested, Obote gathered his ministers at the president's lodge in Kampala for an emergency meeting. After discussing the growing crisis, Obote concluded that the situation was no longer simply a political or civil dispute, but had become a military matter. He decided to order Colonel Idi Amin and the army to take action against the Kabaka's palace. Very early the next morning, Amin's troops launched an attack on the palace. However, the Kabaka appeared to have been warned in advance, because his supporters were armed and prepared to defend him. They fought back much more strongly than the government forces had expected, and the battle continued for several hours. Later in the afternoon, around 3:30 p.m., Amin drove to the president's lodge in his jeep to update Obote on the fighting. He asked for permission to use heavy artillery to shell the Kabaka's main residence. Obote then approved the request. Soon after, powerful explosions shook the palace as artillery shells struck the Kabaka's residence, causing major damage and sending thick smoke into the air. Around the same time, heavy rain suddenly began to pour, forcing the fighting to temporarily stop. When the storm eased, government troops quickly entered the palace grounds searching for the Kabaka. At about 5:30 p.m., Amin returned to the president's lodge carrying items he had taken from the palace, including the Kabaka's presidential flag and the ceremonial cap, that symbolized his role as commander-in-chief of the Ugandan army. Amin reportedly told Obote that he did not know whether the Kabaka had been killed or had escaped. In reality, the Kabaka had used the confusion caused by the storm to escape through a side entrance of the palace. He hid in a nearby house before eventually fleeing Uganda altogether. He first escaped to Burundi and later went into exile in Britain. On September 8, 1967, Obote introduced a new constitution for Uganda that completely changed how the country was governed. One of the biggest changes was the removal of the federal system, which had previously allowed kingdoms like Buganda to govern themselves to some extent. Under the new system, Uganda became a fully unitary state controlled by the central government. The traditional kingdoms lost their special status and were treated like ordinary districts. Buganda itself was divided into 4 separate districts: Masaka, Mobende, East Mengo, and West Mengo, all placed directly under the authority of the central government. Even though Buganda lost much of its political power, the constitution still protected Malo land ownership, which allowed individuals to continue privately owning land in Buganda. However, the government declared that all minerals found under that land would belong to the Ugandan state. The new constitution also abolished the traditional kingdoms and removed the ceremonial rulers and chiefs from official government roles. Their estates and privileges were also taken away. Uganda was then reorganized into 18 districts, all meant to have equal importance under the law. From that point on, the entire country was to be governed through one uniform system, controlled by the central government. The government in Kampala gained authority over district councils, the appointment of chiefs and officials, and the management of district and urban finances. Local land boards were abolished and replaced with a national land commission controlled by the state. The constitution also greatly increased the powers of the president, and changed the rules for how the president could be elected or removed from office. These changes showed that Uganda was moving away from a parliamentary democracy, and toward a system where much more power was concentrated in the hands of one leader. After being forced into exile in England, the Kabaka lived a very difficult life. Once a powerful king, he struggled financially and eventually worked as a social welfare officer to support himself. He lived in a poor area of London and remained far removed from the kingdom he had once ruled. He died prematurely in November 1969. To many of his supporters, his life in exile became a symbol of the downfall of the Buganda kingdom. Despite his hardships, the Kabaka never lost hope. He remained convinced that the Baganda people would continue to support their traditions and their kingdom, even in difficult times. He believed that one day he would return to Buganda and be reunited with his people. Although the British government had provided support during his initial exile, it did little to ease the financial difficulties he faced in his later years. The Kabaka's death created a difficult political dilemma for the Ugandan government. The Baganda people mourned deeply, not only because they had lost their former king, but also because their traditional institutions and monarchy had been abolished just a few years earlier. Relations between the Baganda and Obote's government were still tense, and there was very little trust between the two sides. The government feared that whatever decision it made could create more problems. If it refused to allow the Kabaka's body to be returned to Uganda for burial at the royal tombs in Kasubi, many Baganda would see it as an insult and become even more hostile toward the government. On the other hand, if the body was allowed to return, there was concern that the funeral could spark a massive outpouring of emotion and revive support for the Buganda monarchy. For the rest of Obote's presidency, the issue of the Kabaka's burial remained important to many Baganda traditionalists. Some even discussed the possibility of recognizing a new Kabaka to keep the institution of kingship alive, despite its official abolition. Over time, however, the emotional impact of the Kabaka's death began to fade, and fears that Buganda might push for separation from Uganda became less serious. This changed after the military coup that brought Idi Amin to power. Unlike Obote, Amin was not strongly committed to the idea of a republic in Uganda without kingdoms. A few months after taking power, he arranged for the Kabaka to receive a state funeral, and for his remains to be returned to Uganda for burial at Kasubi. This decision made Amin popular among many Baganda, who appreciated the respect shown to their former king. It also helped Amin strengthen his own position, by winning support from Buganda at a time when he was trying to consolidate power. Even so, Amin was careful to make it clear that bringing back the Kabaka's remains did not mean that the Buganda monarchy would be restored. He insisted that the burial was simply an act of respect, and should not be seen as a political move toward bringing back the kingship. Despite these warnings, some Baganda leaders used the funeral and the visit of Ronald Mutebi, the son and rightful heir of the late Kabaka, as opportunities to strengthen unity among the Baganda people. They met with clan elders and renewed political connections within Uganda. When Amin learned that some leaders were using these events to revive support for the monarchy, he quickly warned them not to expect a return to the old system of kingship. While he was willing to honor the late Kabaka, he had no intention of allowing the restoration of Buganda's traditional political power. The 1966 crisis marked a turning point in Uganda's history. Following the attack on the Kabaka's palace, Kabaka Mutesa II fled into exile, while Milton Obote consolidated his power and in 1967, abolished Uganda's traditional kingdoms. For more than 2 decades, the Buganda monarchy existed only in the memories and traditions of its people, yet the story did not end there. In 1993, the Buganda kingdom was restored, and Ronald Muwenda Mutebi II, the son of Mutesa II, was crowned Kabaka. Although the restored monarchy no longer held political authority, its return symbolized the resilience of Buganda's cultural identity and the enduring legacy of a kingdom that had survived one of the most turbulent chapters in Uganda's history. Today, the events of 1966 remain a subject of reflection and debate, serving as a reminder of the complex relationship between power, tradition, and national unity. The story of Milton Obote and Kabaka Mutesa II is not merely a tale of political rivalry, it is a story that helped shape the Uganda we know today. As we conclude this video, the story of Milton Obote is far from over. In the next episode, we'll take a closer look at Obote's leadership, exploring how he managed to rule Uganda on 2 separate occasions, and examining one of the most debated questions in Uganda's political history. Was Milton Obote a dictator, or has history judged him too harshly? Thank you for watching. If you found this video informative, please subscribe to the channel, like this video, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future episodes.